My name is Adrian, and I graduated from the Rice Lake Residence Program. I'm in recovery for heroin and opiate addiction. I work in hospitality in Toronto, and I have for the last 20 years. My using started about 17 years ago when I first entered the hospitality industry. I worked as a bartender in the Yorkville area. And at first, we would start using just for something to do and to help us sleep, or at least for me to help me sleep. Came from a good family in Toronto, middle class family. Definitely had everything I needed. Maybe not everything I wanted, but definitely everything I needed. No history of addiction, no trauma. Very loving parents, 4 sisters that we all got along very well. So I started working full-time in hospitality, and I guess because there's a lot of substance abuse within that industry, and it's pretty socially accepted. So for me, it started with alcohol, progressed into cocaine, and then eventually found my drug of choice, which is heroin. And at first, like I said, it wasn't really a problem. I didn't do it all the time. It was maybe a couple times a year. And then when I turned 30, I had built a restaurant with my friends, and my dog got very sick, and a good friend of mine's sister died, and it all happened in the same week, and I just found it super overwhelming. So I turned to heroin because sort of everything else had sort of run its course in my life. I didn't find it interesting or like it worked anymore, and as soon as I started using that daily, I felt that I sort of, felt that I hit my stride and that I could deal with anything. And at the same time, I started sort of rising in my career. I started doing competitive bartending, and I had ended up winning a big competition that landed me in the newspapers as Toronto's best bartender. And I accomplished this all under the influence of my drug of choice. So for me, it seemed like using drugs made me more effective, better at my job, more efficient, gave me lots of energy, more charismatic, all of that. And I was accomplishing great things. So continued to use without major consequence until maybe for a year. And then after that, things started getting out of hand. Due to the nature of my drug of choice, there was obviously physical dependency, and I couldn't stop. I tried to stop, but I couldn't stop, and I had asked for help. So it was proposed that I would go on to methadone. For me, that was like, it was even worse than using heroin. It was, I call it liquid handcuffs. So I had to go see the doctor every week and do urine screens, and it didn't even really work. I was still using. So now I'm dependent on 2 substances. So that brings me to about 2010 when I went to treatment for the first time, and I pretty much went because I was told I should go. I didn't go because I wanted to go. I went to treatment. I lasted about 45 days and relapsed. Didn't tell anybody. Prior to this, I had never used needles before. I was only sniffing the heroin. I used for about 4 or 5 months and realized that I was going to be in big trouble again. So I turned to a friend of mine, an active addict, and asked how I could taper myself off of heroin without telling anybody. And he suggested that I use needles to do that. At that point, I was so desperate to get off of it without getting honest with anybody, without asking for help, that I listened to him and I tried to moderate my use with needles, and that took my addiction to the next level, where I was now addicted to heroin and to IV needles. Within 3 months, I had lost my job, I lost my home, and I was now even more addicted. I was relying on far more than I was using before. To me, I felt like I was one bad shot away from dying. So I was about 150 pounds. My normal weight's like 185, 190 pounds. So I went back to the same treatment center, a 21-day program, and then it was suggested that I go on to long-term treatment, which I did. I did 4.5 months just outside of Toronto, and it got some traction, and I hooked up with some good group of guys, and to this day that I'm still in touch with, and life started getting really good. I'd actually gotten my name into the newspapers for being a sober bartender, mixologist they call it, and accomplishing some really great things in my career. I was, I guess, considered the only person within my industry to be clean and sober. Switched from bartending to managing. I started running restaurants, really enjoyed it, and did really well, and life was really good. However, I guess I got away from what was important, which is my recovery. So I stopped practicing my program, and I ended up relapsing. I had a dog that I was very close to who ended up dying suddenly. I had some very disappointing things happen in my job in terms of like career and promises and expectations, and I had a very unhealthy relationship with a partner that we just were not good for each other. So all of these things came together, and I wasn't working my program, and I wasn't around other addicts, I wasn't helping other people, I wasn't doing the things I was supposed to do, and eventually I ended up relapsing by injuring my back, going to the hospital, getting prescribed an opiate-based painkiller, thinking that I was okay to take it. I was not, and within 2 months I sought out heroin and started injecting heroin again. I was sold a bad batch of drugs, and I got into 3 car accidents in one day, and so that's how it sort of started the process of bringing me back into recovery. A big part of my story is what I do for a living, because a lot of my using revolved around work, because it's very physical, it's very stressful. You know, it can just be very hard to deal with, many different personalities, many different, you know, lots of ego. So I wasn't really willing to let go of my job at the time, and so instead of going back to abstinent-based recovery, I turned to Suboxone, which is a harm reduction based sort of semi-abstinence, and it just was not effective for me. All it did was sort of kept me in that world revolving around drugs, and I was supposed to be on it for 6 weeks, and I ended up staying on for 2 years. And I got a phone call from somebody that I hadn't heard for a while, and they told me that they had some really good heroin, and that, you know, they had thought of me, and that, you know, they thought I might enjoy it. And I said, no, I'm okay, and it sort of rang in my head for the day, and I ended up calling the gentleman. Well, not quite gentleman, but I bought some of it, and it turned out that it was very, very strong fentanyl, and again, that just took my addiction to another level. My use pretty much quadrupled overnight. The withdrawal got worse, the cravings got worse, and I just couldn't stop. So, and I'm not really sure why I had a big problem asking for help and being honest with everyone around me, but I was in such strong denial about how bad things were getting that I just did it. I was so broken and so beaten down that I was pretty sure I was going to die. I actually had considered killing myself at one point. I don't think I would ever have done it, but I sort of fantasized about it, and I was just done with it. I sort of had the willingness to ask for help beaten back into me. So finally I got honest with my parents about how bad things were, and just basically told them, if you guys don't help me, I'm pretty sure I'm going to die soon. So that obviously was very difficult for them to hear and difficult for me to say. And we agreed that we would start the detox process while we figured out where I was going to go. And so I started detoxing at the beginning of September, and I guess what had happened was the day after I started, or the day I started, I ended up getting rushed to the hospital from a bad reaction to the medication I was given to help manage the withdrawal symptoms. And at that point, I felt like I was going to die. It was just some of the worst pain I've ever gone through. I could hardly breathe, and I was hardly conscious. And I was in the hospital for about 24 hours. Got released and came back, and it was proposed to me that there was an option for me to go back to treatment soon, which turned out to be Rice Lake. And without hesitation, I said, of course, like, I knew I was done, because there was no way I was going to stay clean. I had a lot of knowledge about recovery, but I was in such poor physical state, and the obsession to use and the cravings were so strong, and just that my body was in so much pain that I knew that I wasn't going to be able to stay clean. And talking to some counselors and some of the other clients there, I started seeing the light, and then I just made this decision that, you know, I'm not going to stay stuck in this sort of negative frame of mind. And I just started working on things like acceptance and gratitude, and forgiveness, like, towards myself, and almost immediately I started feeling better, and I sort of just ran with that. Probably for the first 2 weeks, all I talked about was acceptance and gratitude, because that's what I needed to say. I needed to accept all the consequences that had happened, accept that I was back in treatment, accept that how far I had allowed things to go, as well as I also had to talk about gratitude, because I was very grateful to be alive. I was very grateful to be clean and sober, and very grateful to be in a safe place. And, you know, for me, that's sort of the foundation of my recovery, is acceptance, gratitude, and forgiveness. And, you know, I try and practice those every single day. And the way things are today is, I have no desire to use drugs. And again, I'm just very grateful to be alive. And I think that's just the way it works with addiction, is it doesn't really matter what causes it or why it happens. It happens, accept it, and then take the actions to do something about it. And that's pretty much my story.